Well, hi, Eric. Thanks for helping my project. I was wondering if we could start off by you saying a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Eric Turer, live in southern New Hampshire. I know Nathan because we both are blessed enough to have very smart and personable sons that were friends in high school locally here in Exeter. And we've luckily been able to maintain some connection even after they went their own ways. And of course, they are now both back at home. So you never know where life's taking you. I professionally, I do healthcare policy consulting around access to care for underserved populations. It's called underserved populations. So rural, low income, marginalized people. Another thing that's sort of topical. But I've always had an interest in science. My undergrad degree is in science. Most people tell me I should have been an engineer instead of what I'm doing. Luckily, not the people I work with. But that's about it. I live with my wife and my two kids. My son George went to school with Nathan's son, and my daughter Sophie.
And with health policy, with this whole COVID lockdown, at least at the beginning, a lot of people were afraid to go to doctors for routine things. I remember I had like an infection on my finger, and I knew I needed antibiotics, but I didn't want to go to the doctor. And I found out my health plan had a telemedicine option. So I was able to schedule an appointment. The doctor was able to look at my finger, prescribe the prescription, get it, ordered to a local pharmacy. I went through the drive-through, I picked it up, and, kind of like touchless medicine. And I imagine this whole COVID-19 lockdown thing is probably really opened up people's eyes to this telemedicine concept. And in the underserved populations that you're talking about, how does telemedicine come into play? And do you really see maybe it opening up a way to better serve them?
Yeah, so that's really interesting because, as a rural health person for many, many years, we had always looked to telemedicine, as probably the best way to expand access to a whole bunch of different types of services in rural communities that couldn't necessarily support them individually. And, it's funny how, I shouldn't say funny, but, the upside of the lockdown, as I call it, has been, all the fights over telemedicine that have been going on for decades just fell by the wayside overnight. Like all of a sudden there was reimbursement. It wasn't even so much the technology, it was whether people would pay for it. And so all of a sudden there was reimbursement parity. You were allowed to expand who could be on which end of the telemedicine connection. So I worked with the community health centers, and now they could be the the origin or the destination site for the visits. So and now basically people are trying to figure out how to lock in these changes so that we actually continue to expand using these tools. I like I said, it's a positive that's come out of this. And flip side, my wife's a physician, and they were limited in terms of what they could do because people couldn't come in electively to the hospital. And so, she began doing some of her work telemedicine. She delivers babies, so you can't do that part. But, the routine part, now there's going to be a big potential backlog, just like you said, of preventive care and things like that. So people are in the public health world concerned about, not seeing, a second wave of not virus, but all the other stuff that should have been going on in terms of prevention and routine care that got delayed. So yeah, interesting time.
And actually for me, just finding out about the service, signing up, getting to see a doctor, and getting the prescription, like that entire process took like maybe 10 to 15 minutes, which would have been longer just to go to a doctor's office. And so, now I'm like, I think I'm going to take the telemedicine option as like my first thing, just to validate that I really do need to go see a doctor, or, see if maybe it can be resolved remotely, because it's so convenient.
Yeah, yeah, it's amazing what can be done. I mean, there's all different levels. It started out, a lot of it was mental health because you could do that remotely fairly easily. But I remember probably 20 years ago visiting a hospital in Cuba, New York, this tiny little town that had a experimental telemedicine connection to the University of the medical school in Buffalo, and they basically could teleconnect and even in the ER was what they were doing with it, so they could get high level support from far away instantly, instead of 3 hour drive transport the patient. So it's funny how that was 20 years ago, and we're just now starting to actually use that technology to do things effectively. So fingers crossed.
Yeah, and especially like for specialists. I mean, you could have a GP or maybe a nurse practitioner or a physician's assistant who's able to do all the physical stuff with like high bandwidth connections with a good camera and sensor type thing connected back to specialists
Yep.
who are just basically seeing patient after patient after patient. I mean, the same specialist might be able to see like 15 patients an hour if they get it set up right. It's like collect this data, do these tests, okay, and then ping me whenever you're done, and
Yeah.
then they're off to another patient. They come back. uh, I mean, it
Yeah,
seems
it's
very
fun.
promising.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's disrupting sort of some of the work in a good way that I do, because a lot of my work is in access to care, and we've always sort of treated that as physical distance. How many minutes of a drive, et cetera, do you have to get to a doctor's office? And all of a sudden, that whole construct may be changing. I mean, your doctor could be half the country away, and so we're really looking at how we're going to change how we study access, and again, maybe if it's reimbursed, looking at the way that the patient and the doctor interact by way of a claim rather than by way of like physical distance, just to be able to tell maybe people are getting access in areas where you can't place a provider. But we're not there yet. But the broadband thing in rural areas is definitely still a real problem, because they're the places that need it the most, and they have the weakest connection. So
Have you heard of SpaceX Starlink?
I did hear of SpaceX Starlink. Yes, they had a couple of big wins with launching to the space station, and then a week later, was it, or something like that, they launched the Starlink. So yeah, anything that sort of brings information access into remote areas. I know a lot of people are concerned about having all these satellites up in the air, but I think the connectivity is sort of a first priority issue, getting people in remote areas connected.
Well, and to think probably next year sometime, pretty much any place in the United States you'll be able to put this receiver and have like high bandwidth, low latency connection to the internet. I mean, it's just like at that point you could do telemedicine, you could do remote work, you could do remote education. I mean, there's literally no reason to be physically concentrated in cities anymore.
I totally agree. I am amazed. Being again a sort of person focused on rural health in a way, there's been these predictions that more and more people are going to live in cities, and I've been saying for like a decade, I'm like, I'm expecting this big rural renaissance to happen, because all of a sudden, all of the amenities that you could only get in the city, one of which was having some form of professional employment, you know, and arts and culture, all these things all of a sudden are, you know, again, maybe not the exact equivalent of seeing a live show, but, when I've gone to a concert, so we live in New Hampshire, so if we want to see a big concert, you go to the arena in Boston, the whatever, whoever owns the Garden these days. Um, and it's funny because you're in this giant, stadium setting, and there's your live musician on stage, and you're watching him on a video monitor because you can't see him that far away. So I'm like, okay, so I drove into Boston, did all this stuff, got a ticket, paid a lot of money, and now I'm watching them on a jumbotron that's not as good a quality as my TVs.
And
So,
with the right sound system and fellow watchers, you could recreate the experience anyway.
no, absolutely. I mean, we just watched Hamilton in our backyard last week as a celebration of the 4th of July. Who would have thought? Like, my wife's been dying to go see Hamilton in, you know, on stage forever, never quite got there. So yeah, it's a strange new world, and I'll diverge for a moment. I drive a Tesla now. I was very reluctant, like I wasn't sure if I could fully cut the hose, as they called it, and I'm just blown away by what he's been able to put into place, not just the technology in the vehicles and the price that he's gotten them down to, but the charging infrastructure across the country for these fast chargers that makes it really feasible to take any trip on in an electric car. It knows where the charging stations are, how long you have to spend there to get to your next point. And again, while he's doing that, he is launching people into space, and he's creating the Starlink system. I it's going to be hard to fathom what the impact that his work is having in this world.
Oh, I know. And also look at the Boring Company.
The Boring Company, exactly.
And Neuralink.
Yep, exactly. Neuralink, the solar,
it's hard to believe this is
the
one person.
the home batteries, I wish the solar thing had gotten a little further, a little faster, but yeah, I mean, talk about feeling bad whenever you sit down and put your feet up for 5 minutes.
No, it's like, what have I done? It's like 7 billion wasted lives,
Right. And he may do something once a week that drives me insane, but you know what?
Yeah, perfection is a tall order.
Yeah, exactly. So, space?
Oh, yes. So did you know that NASA is planning to put people on the moon in 2024?
So that's interesting. So I tried not to do any pre-reading for this, and I did not know that we were focused on putting people on the moon. All the energy seemed to have been focused on Mars, and so I didn't realize that there was an effort underway to put people on the moon again, until I saw this initiative, which I think is the coolest thing, by the way.
Yeah, there's a guy, Doug Laverio. He was hired as the NASA Associate Administrator of Human Exploration Operations Division. And he was doing this. He had like a lapel pin with the number of days to the end of 2024, which he would count down on a daily thing just to kind of emphasize to everybody, this is the target, this is the mission. Mm-hmm. And he was doing this HEO, for Human Exploration Operations, hero of the day, where he would choose employee and kind of call out the work that they were doing as helping us to advance there. So that kind of inspired this. I'm like, well, wouldn't it be cool to find out what everyday people think about this endeavor and how their views are? So that's sort of the thing. And it's been a great way to reconnect with people. And it was actually my cure to social distancing, because I work from home and I could go for days without seeing other people. So I was like, if I have something that forces me to go out and meet a person every day to do an interview, then that would be a good thing. So.
Yes. No, I think it's a great idea, because I also worked from home before the COVID thing came along. So, I technically have an office, but I would go there, I'd force myself once a week or whenever there was some reason to go. So yeah, no, I think this is good. I've been doing Zoom or WebEx before that for 20 years as my way of working, and it's just amazing that the world just recently discovered, what you can do, and it's got upsides and downsides. I now am on Zoom meetings almost all day long, but it is nice, and you can have a good connection over Zoom. Everyone now puts their camera on, which didn't used to be the case, so that's good too.
Yeah, it's really funny. My work has kind of changed a little bit. Before the whole COVID lockdown thing, pretty much everybody used their cameras, but now people don't. And
it went the other way for you, huh?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I've had the exact opposite experience of that.
Yeah, but anyway, so that was kind of interesting. But what do you think about space exploration in terms of like the future of humanity? Um, and I guess just to kind of provide a little bit more direction to that question, do you see like projecting out in the future of humanity always being on Earth and potentially making like little day trips and week trips places? Or do you really fundamentally see at some point humanity figuring out how to kind of branch out beyond the Earth and encapsulate the entire solar system and maybe much further over some period of time?
Yeah, so I've always been enamored with the idea that we can step off of this planet that we were, founded on. And, I was, born in 1966. So, right a few years before we landed men on the moon. Um, and so it's always been a phenomenon. Like, I still think of it as probably the greatest of human achievements to be able to pull off with, my in-laws were involved somewhat in the Apollo missions, and, the technology they had back then, and what they were able to achieve with that versus what we have today. It's just astounding. So I would say I would be very surprised if we don't branch out into, other parts of the universe. And I'd like to think we could get our act together here a little bit better before we do that. But, but yeah, the work on human colonization of Mars has always been a fascinating idea. The idea that we could actually move to another planet and somehow find a way to make it, not just a fishbowl experiment for humans, but basically somehow habitable. And I've always been perplexed a little with the distances and the time frames that moving to, say, another Earth-like planet where you could truly actually visit and inhabit. you know, but I'm hoping that maybe with, the ever evolving technology, I mean, no one ever thought you could fly to, London in 6 hours, or probably less than that, or who knows, once the Boring Company has its place. Um, you know, so yeah, I think that, we will look back on the Earth, as hopefully the genesis of moving out into the universe in a positive way. you know, it's also impossible to not think about, like, how will we move out into the universe given our history of, say, moving into this country, and it all started from some genesis, and then moving. So I'm kind of rambling, but I'm very hopeful that would happen, and I'm very hopeful that by the time we have the technology to do it, we'll also have the responsibility to do it, correctly. And who knows? I also firmly believe that it would be astounding if we were the only sentient life in the universe. So, at some point we may contact other life if we can find a way to bridge the gaps, and that'll be a whole new chapter.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I was wondering how familiar you were with Elon Musk's kind of vision and goals for his space company and what have you. I mean, if you've heard anything.
I'm probably not real well versed in what his actual vision is. I mean, I know that he's, plans to essentially democratize a lot of this, or I don't know if that's the right word, but, make it more readily available, in terms of all the technological areas. And like I said, I look at what he did with electric vehicles, which were, all theoretically possible for hundreds of years, and not more than theoretically, they existed, but they weren't practical, and he made the leap. So I think if someone's able to do it, hopefully him. But no, tell me more.
Yes, so he sees that we need to hurry up and make life multiplanetary. And he wants, I think the time frame's like by 2050,
Mhm.
have a self-sustained city on Mars with like a population of like maybe 1 million people.
Yeah.
And he's really kind of devoting everything to try to make that happen as quickly as possible. And he believes that once we have like this other independent group of humans, it will allow for us to essentially better ensure the continuity of life and humanity and things like that. But also, it's really difficult to justify the investment in human space travel right now because there's really no place to go. The moment you get like a viable destination, like Las Vegas, for example, suddenly
Might not be the best example.
may not be the best example, but you know, it is a.
Although that is a place that humans are not supposed to live in the numbers that they do, so it's probably a good correlate anyway.
And it was an artificial city in a way, kind of created for the purpose of visiting. But so that's his vision. And, you know, he's working on building the Starship in Boca Chica, Texas, which is 100% reusable spacecraft that'll be able to carry 100 people at a time to space. It'd be versatile in the sense to be able to get you to two places anywhere in the world in like, you know, maybe 30, 40 minutes. You could use it to go to orbit. You could use it to go to the moon. You could use it to go to Mars. And he's not building one of them. He's building a factory that he thinks he'll be able to produce 2 of them a week, and that each one could do as many as 3 flights into orbit a day. And whenever you start looking at that kind of like scale and the change there, it's just what becomes possible becomes, it's hard to imagine today.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the same thing I was saying about crossing the Atlantic, you know, in the generation of transportation before that. You know, you know, what used to be a dangerous, arduous, you know, lengthy journey, you know, became, you know, not cheap, but relatively cheap, certainly doable by middle-class people and you know, without inconveniencing your life. And so, yeah, the next step probably will have an equal impact, you know, and the fact that the airline industries are all struggling with COVID may open the door.
Yeah, you know, I was thinking about that. It seems like we need to do a better job at inspecting the people that come to countries on airlines. And I was thinking, you have like this whole group of the people in like the air for like maybe 9, 10, 12, 14 hours, kind of in this enclosed environment. What if we couldn't create some type of sensor technology to put in the air system to detect viruses and pathogens and things? And then by the time they land, you like know whether or not.
Whether this flight needs to be quarantined. Yeah, it's a great. They're doing it with the sewer water. Have you seen that? They're basically sampling They're sampling the sewer water coming from cities now to determine the viral load of the population, and not to pinpoint individuals, but to tell whether or not the virus is present or rising or falling. And they're basically saying, yeah, you could test, you know, 1 million people, you know, or you could basically watch the effluent from the city and determine whether there's need to take additional steps. So, you know, we do find ways of getting around thorny problems. But yeah, I right in the middle of the pandemic, a coworker of mine was in southern Spain where there was a big outbreak going on. She flew home to JFK, let her off the plane, no test. They directed everyone to touchscreen terminals where everyone was basically using their fingers to do it. And she was just like, as a public health person herself, she was like, I could not believe what they were doing. So, yeah, we could be a little smarter than we're being.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's that's the thing. Like if we go to another planet, you know, again, we're bringing whatever we are with us. So maybe this is a good example of, you know, like, you know, obviously the places we're going don't have any known life forms or whatever, but, you know, but we that's what I mean about being responsible as we start branching out into the universe to be, you know, a force for, you know, exploration and science and connectivity, and not, you know, disease and war and everything else that we seem to have trouble getting away from.
Yeah, that is a difficult problem in terms of war and conflict and dealing with people who have completely different aims than you do, that you don't trust, and all the things that lead to war and conflict. what do you see as the beginnings of solutions to those types of problems?
That's a tough one, right? Because I mean, it's really, I've always said it's a matter of how broadly or narrowly we define the term "we" whenever we are doing something, back in the early days of space exploration, it felt like, we were very unified. We had this cause, we had a common purpose, which again may have been conflict with, the Soviet Union, but, you know, there was a lot of unity, and obviously there's been some not great movies made about, what happens when, we have contact with another, you know, life form from elsewhere in the universe, and maybe that pulls humanity back together and says, hey, guess what, But again, I hate to frame it in those ways. I hate to think that, like, our first reaction to, contact with any other entity in the universe would be defensive. But it is hard to get around. I mean, I will say, I'm surprised that it took us this long to create a space force. I'm not pleased about the idea of sort of, rolling, as opposed to NASA, which was a science-based organization, to move into a military-based, because militarization of space could be a hugely dangerous proposition. We could escalate the already existing dangers we've created for ourselves around, instant, almost uncontrollable problems that come from small, skirmishes blowing up. And I don't know what the goals of this new thing are, but I don't like the idea of militarizing space. I think it's amazing that we've gotten this far without putting, at least as far as I know, weaponry into space. But
And it's kind of interesting how weapons have advanced. I used to with the intercontinental ballistic missile, the technology is such that there would be this period where you could kind of defeat it in space. But now with like hypersonic missiles that travel right above the ground and can zigzag and avoid radar detection, and it's like space is not really useful for that.
yeah, no, I like I said, we're both our own, the things we can do are amazing, but we are also potentially our worst enemy, our own worst enemy, as long as we go. And space is amazing because, the planet becomes very small and very accessible, which is good in many ways, but not in terms of militarization. I don't really want to think that our worst weapons could be that close at hand all the time.
Yeah, it's kind of funny to think about how we constantly create our own mental bonds in terms of thinking about peace and humanity. If you look at any map or any globe, the first thing that is apparent and obvious on that is the political divisions of the land masses and the sea masses and what have you. But if you look at the picture of Earth from space, you'll be very surprised to not see any of those lines or differences in colors between what we call different countries.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. No, it's you know, looking at the little blue ball from, the pictures that people have taken from, well, the moon, and even some of the look backs pictures that have been taken by some of the satellites that have gone further out. You realize that this is a pretty tiny little dot that we all share. And it's pretty unique. And you know, I wish people had more of an appreciation for sort of just how kind of amazing it is that we have what we have. And, but again, I wish I had a better answer for your question about what we do about those things, around, war and conflict as we move out. Hopefully, like I said, if science can be, and exploration can lead the way. I've always loved the stories of the journals of Lewis and Clark. I read, kind of a phenomenal thing that the Lewis and Clark expedition, was co-led by two very different people. Essentially their goal was to tell the people of the Western United States that, hey, we're here and we're more or less in charge, but it wasn't a military mission. I mean, they were military people, but, there was no, it didn't have a military purpose. They didn't bring tons of weaponry with them, and they mostly, you know, had a peaceful initial conflict or contact with most of the native populations they ran into, and even collaborated with them. You know, it was a bright spot. It didn't stay that way for very long, but it was, if we could have more of a Lewis and Clark style approach to space, that would be great. you know.
So everybody is probably familiar with Jeff Bezos as the founder and CEO of Amazon, but did you know that Jeff also has a space company?
I don't think I knew that. What's the name of it?
Blue Origin.
Oh yeah, okay. So I've heard of Blue Origin. I guess I just don't normally associate it with who owns it.
They're a lot more secretive and less flashy than SpaceX. They don't have as many visible achievements, but they actually got started slightly before SpaceX. And Jeff, has had a long time passion about space, and he gave a talk last year unveiling this lunar lander that Blue Origin was developing for transporting people and things to the moon. But Jeff says, has a little different vision than Elon does. He says that, Earth is like the most special place in the entire solar system. There's nothing else that compares to it. He's like, if you go to the absolutely highest point on the Earth, where it's like cold and, the air is thin, that place will be a garden spot compared to Mars,
Yeah.
So it's like, don't even think of Mars as a destination. So he sort of has two views. One is we should use space to move all of the Earth harming activities off of the Earth. So like the energy production, mining, manufacturing, and then basically allow for Earth to essentially be a habitation for human life and other life. So that's the one thing. The second thing is he thinks that we should expand out into space, but in artificial structures, like huge, structures that are built from space materials that use like centrifugal force to create the field of gravity. And each of these worlds could be custom made for various purposes. Some may feel like a nice city on Earth. Some may be used for agricultural and what have you. And that really, this is the future of humanity, is in these big space structures that are very comfortable to live in. And I was just wondering what you thought about Jeff's vision versus Elon's.
Well, it's interesting because I mean, obviously, there's again referencing the movie industry. I mean, there have been these visions of craft that we could use to so whether it's a floating planet would seem a bit duplicative because we already have sort of a planet that we could say we could go to Mars, that's going to sit in one place and sort of be a place that you could live. The idea of a craft or something that could be self-sustaining and could move away from the Earth, and basically sustain life or however whatever is needed to get somewhere else in the universe, to me is much more compelling, because then we really are voyaging out into the universe, whereas, Mars is going to be where Mars is, and I don't think anyone's got a plan to put a rocket on it and move it anywhere else. But, but these solar sails and other things that they've come up with that, can allow people to sort of propel out through the universes. I think that is if we're ever going to go to, say, our next most likely, habitable planet, or we're going to, go elsewhere in the universe as an exploration, it feels like we have to do something more like a craft rather than, just an outpost on a planet. So it's a great thing. But one thing I should have said is, I've long been okay with the idea that we weren't sending humans into space, because we got so much good science done through unmanned missions. And, the hardest part about manned space travel is us. We're just these fragile little, you know, creatures that have very narrow bandwidth that we can tolerate. So, I was kind of amazed at what we could do with, rovers and deep space probes and all these other things that, that have really told us a whole ton about what, the universe and other planets are like. And so I guess I'm viewing this maybe as like, all right, maybe we now know enough that, we can actually think about, putting humans back up and going to another place, because now we know what Mars is about. We've done the probes. We know if there's water in the ice and, the other things. So I don't know whether that's how you think about that, but, I for a long time thought, well, it's so much more cost effective to put, 20 experiments and a bunch of sensors and cameras and, tools on a rover and put that on Mars, than it would be to get people there, because, but ultimately, it's kind of like, having a web meeting with you versus getting together with you. Like, it's a thing. You can get a lot done, but it's not quite the same. So I don't know like how that factors in, and whether they're competing, whether manned space travel it would compete with or would supplement unmanned science exploration.
Yeah, I think they definitely compete for each other in budget, but they definitely complement each other in practice. So I kind of need both. And let's see, I just had a thought and lost it. Yeah, maybe it'll come back.
Yeah.
So if it was safe and affordable, would you have any interest in traveling into space?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I like to explore. I've often, joked that I'm a fully metastasized human because I, scuba dive and we also paraglide. So like, with just without anything surrounding me, I'm able to go down to the bottom of the ocean or up to the, clouds in the sky. And I love that. I love the ability to feel like, I can go anywhere, and explore it. I mean, every time it's an exploration. And, the idea that we don't have a frontier anymore is, a little bit disheartening. It's amazing that they say, we know less about the bottom of the ocean than we do about the surface of Mars. But, yeah, the idea that there would be, the potential to actually, go into space and, and experience space. I saw your weightless flight even was, I remember when you posted that. I thought that was pretty phenomenal. And that's not, that's a simulation, but, it would be more than just to sort of experience weightlessness. It would be sort of hopefully to firsthand, touch something or go to a place that you just didn't think was possible before. So I think that is kind of the core of like human ambition, is to, to push those boundaries. So yeah, I would definitely love to see that come to pass. And safe is a relative thing, obviously. It took a long time before commercial airlines were, as safe as they are. So, I mean, there's going to be there'll probably be a phase where, it won't be for everyone, but, even in that phase, as long as there's, reasonable systems in place, you have to rely on them. You have to have faith in them. And, I mean, that's sort of, like I said, scuba diving, paragliding, you're putting your faith in some technology that's been honed over the years, and the first people who did it might not have all had the greatest experience, but, but they're building something.
Or the other thing I've been seeing is paramotoring. That looks really,
Yes.
put the fan on your back and just take off.
So that was supposed to be a to-do this summer. Might still be a to-do this summer because we live in the flat part of New Hampshire, and so our closest flying sites are 2.5 hours away, basically, or more. So the idea of being able to paramotor is is appealing from that perspective, but it's very different because you're not relying on the forces of nature to carry you, like paragliding, you're using updrafts and you're trying to read the wind, and whereas paramotoring, you're looking for very still air, and it's sort of like the vehicle type thing. It's taking you somewhere, but you're it's a much more controlled thing. So it's a different experience. But yeah, I mean, Texas has a lot of people who are obviously, um, being a wide open flats state for a lot of it. It's pretty amazing. And again, they're starting to create electric paramotors that are you know that are more powerful and eventually more powerful, quieter. Don't have counter rotating forces and stuff. So who knows? Maybe that'll be Elon Musk's next thing.
That would be interesting. So there's two ways to think. I mean, there's probably many ways to kind of think about safety, but one way that's sort of intuitive is how many people have to safely go before you feel comfortable going. Like, is it, if it was an option available tomorrow, would you go, or would you need like 100,000 people to go ahead of you, or maybe and there's a wasp thing going around here. I think I'll move.
Yeah, don't get stung.
Would you need like 1 million people to go, or 100,000, or 100? I mean, like, when you think about safety, like in those terms, how many people safely going would you need to go first?
Yeah, that's hard to say. It's again, there's sort of an implied statistics in there. I think about this car that I bought. I don't have the full self-driving mode, but I have the version that will follow the lines on the road, so it's traffic aware cruise control, so it knows where the cars around you are, keeps its distances, follows the lines on the road, keeps the speed limits plus or minus, and I know some people when they're in my car are not comfortable with that. I turn it on. I love to drive, but I turn that on almost all the time because they've already shown that, it's better than us. It's better than, I've been driving for close, 40 years almost before that car came around. And, the idea that this thing actually does better than me, keeps the lane better, is more aware of what's around it than I probably am. So it would really be more that kind of calculus of like, is this, within the realm where we've ironed out the bugs. I know it took a lot of miles, of test driving for Tesla systems to learn how to do those things.
Yeah, so. And they can constantly learn from each other and upgrade. So there's lots, and they never get distracted by a stray thought, or get tired or have to take something out of their eye.
Right, so. Right, exactly. No, it is exactly that. And my first time out with it, was driving into Boston. So it's two great things. They're very long, boring highway trips. Where you just, like you said, you either get fatigued or you lose your attention. And the car doesn't. Or the first time was going into Boston. Stuck in a stop and go traffic jam for an hour and a half, and the car was doing all the work. Like, I was just amazed. I was chatting with a friend from work and who went with me, and the car starting and stopping and following the lines, and in an hour and a half, I barely had to touch it. And then the car two in front, not the one right in front of it, the one in front of it, and the car next to that, both pulled off to the center median, and we're looking at them going, what's going on there? They'd actually had a pretty significant fender bender. The whole front end of the second car was crushed in. We never even realized it happened because the car just basically perceived that something is happening, slowed down, not in a lurching way, but hour and a half of traffic, I probably would have hit the car in front of me if that wasn't there. To me, that was all the proof I needed. I'm like, yeah, there you go.
And I love how you have the option of how many car lengths away you want to follow. So
yes.
If you're like me and I really like my space around me, I can put 4 or 5 car lengths back. But then, like, you're like some other drivers I know, you probably put it like half a car back.
Right. Right. Exactly. Right. Tailgating mode.
Yeah, tailgating mode. It's like how much stress do you want the person in front of you to have? This is like the inverse of that. So
Right.
I,
Right. Right.
I would like to be a stress producer, or would you like to?
Yeah. Well, I noticed that, it doesn't understand things like somebody trying to merge into traffic where you'd normally be a good person and let them in, or like construction zones and stuff. So we're like, the one problem is if you don't pay attention, you can look sort of like a jerk because
Right.
you're like, so we said that should be a setting too. Should you give deference to cars that are trying to enter the road, or do you put it in jerk mode because you are? But the default is jerk mode. It doesn't really give way to somebody who honestly you should have, you know, slowed down and let them get on the road. So
And then the second part of the other question is, how far would you go? Are you talking about like a suborbital trip? Would you go into orbit for like a week, maybe spend 2 weeks going to the moon and coming back, or a multi-year trip to Mars? I mean, like, how far would you go?
yeah, that's a really interesting question. Because if you talk about going somewhere other than like even Mars would be a fairly significant investment in your life. um, you know, Obviously, the further you go, the theoretically the more you might get out of it. But eventually, you're talking about severing your ties, and you know, it would probably end up varying by phase of life. So, I guess it'd have to depend on like, all right, what's going on with my family? Do I have grandchildren that I want to spend time with back on, or like, are you one of those people who gets to a phase where you're like, well, it's pretty much just me or whatever, and you know, um, so I mean, right now I would think it would be, well, it's kind of like traveling to, like we went to South Africa. It's not worth going for a day, you know. So yeah, I would say, weeks, maybe even months, but probably not more than that for me, because I like where we are still, despite its current issues.
Well, that's pretty much all the questions I had. Was there anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't touch on?
Uh, how did you get involved in this?
Um,
Turn the camera around for a minute.
yeah, so I think whenever I was young, my dad used to take me to the Johnson Space Center. He lived in Houston, and I'd go visit him every other weekend. And that's back then, the Johnson Space Center, you could actually, they didn't have any type of like facility set up like Space Center Houston now. You actually go on campus without any type of security check or anything and walk around the buildings just like the employees. And they would have like exhibits set up in like various places.
Hmm.
So I used to go there and look at all this. And then my friends were really big into Star Trek. So the idea of us going to space is always kind of like in the back of my mind. And then, SpaceX, they're actually making it happen. It's like, why couldn't we have had SpaceX in like the 1970s and really continue on with the Apollo program? That would have been great. Um, and,
Yeah.
it's just like some people are like, that I've talked to are like, I don't think it happened in my lifetime. I think it eventually happened in the future. And I guess the part that I'm concerned about is if we're not actually doing it, why do we think somebody after us would? It's kind of like the challenge. So, uh, yeah. So that's kind of that. So I hadn't figured out any like really constructive actions, but I thought the first step is to network with people and get people's thoughts and kind of explore the issue a little bit more, and then maybe something constructive will come out of this, some insight.
Yeah, yeah, no, when as soon as I saw you post that thing, I was thinking, well, A, it'll be a great way to reconnect, and B, it's such an interesting concept of discussing the theoretical future, that maybe isn't that theoretical anymore, right as it's taking shape, and I know that you're so tied into it that, I was very intrigued by the idea of sort of what, one question. I just remember the one question I was going to ask if you have another minute. What is the goal of going to the moon? Because obviously the moon is less habitable, theoretically, from my understanding, without some form of, support that you brought with you. So is it a stepping stone to Mars? Is it an observation of Earth? Is it like, I just wasn't sure what the goal was of the moon.
Well, I think with an issue like us going back to the moon, especially with a government program, there isn't a goal. There's like a whole spectrum and smorgasbords of goals, and trying to get a lot of people into it. But if you were to ask me of why I think we should go to the moon, I can answer that. I mean, the moon is, a ball of resources right there in space. It's always 3 days away from the Earth. It's not like an asteroid that's circling around the sun that you have to catch up with that may take you years to get to and from. So you have it from the resource standpoint. And we kind of knew that it had like metals and other things on the moon. But one thing that we discovered in 2010 was it actually has water ice in the poles of the moon. The moon has a 1 degree tilt with respect to the sun, unlike the Earth that's like 26 degrees tilt, where the summer pole has like 24/7 daylight, and the winter pole has 24/7 night. On the moon, you don't have those extremes, but then you have like these craters that are on the poles that over billions of years, comets and wet meteors have impacted the moon. And some of those molecules have made it into these permanently shadowed areas that are actually colder than the surface of Pluto. And they're just then kind of trapped there. And these materials have built up over time. And water is key. It's like very heavy, but at the same token, we need it to live. You can you use electrolysis to break it apart into oxygen and hydrogen. You could use those for rocket fuel, and you could use the oxygen to breathe.
Right.
But then you have like the science part. We actually don't know that much about the moon, despite having visited there and sent probes. So there's a lot right there that we could learn. I mean, one thing to consider is meteors are constantly hitting the Earth, but the vast majority of those meteors luckily burn up in the atmosphere. The ones that actually do make it through the atmosphere, most of those end up in the ocean. And the ones that end up in land, most of those, get weathered away or grown over, you don't know. But the moon's been traveling with the Earth through the same environment. And since it doesn't have an atmosphere, all of those similar types of impacts are there. So it really provides a record in terms of what are like the asteroid impacts. Did you know that there's a comet that's visible right after sunset right now called Comet Neowise?
Yeah, I was looking at that, yeah.
That comet was discovered in March of this year. And based upon its orbit, it would circle the sun every 6,000 years, which is a huge amount of time, right?
Human terms, anyway, yeah.
In human terms. I mean, that's essentially all of recorded history, 6,000 years, right?
Yeah.
Now, what if there is like a whole bunch of space debris that's in one of these long orbits that is like currently far away from the Earth, and it may be, hundreds of years or longer before it like comes back. But there's some evidence of that the Earth having traveled through that space on the moon. That might be something very interesting for us to know about, And plus, rare earth metals are actually from meteorites. And so there's a lot more resources there. So I think it's resources, knowledge, proximity. We know that being in free fall around the Earth, in space, produces a lot of negative health benefits.
Yes.
And that goes away whenever you start having like Earth level gravity. But is the moon's 1/7 gravity enough to counteract those? That might also be something kind of interesting to see.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's great. I was just curious, like whether there was a particular focal point for that process or not, because like I said, Mars seems to suck up all the shouldn't use that terminology. Mars gets all the attention, because like it's this idea of colonization and building like a place that you could go, but I never sort of thought of the moon in the same light. So that's good. That's good to know that it's kind of a broad-based, like I don't think science should just be always for a purpose. Some of it, a lot of it's just for the pure learning, and then we'll figure out what to do with that knowledge as we go. So no, that's good. And I do also wish that like there were, I've been intrigued by all the sort of virtual reality things that you can do just with, headsets and things. I would love to see us do some more things where you could sort of take the first step and really like, have an immersive experience, of some of these things in advance of actually being able to go. But yeah, it's amazing what tools we have. It's amazing, what between the coming technologies, the artificial intelligence, and the things that we should theoretically be able to learn if we can just get out of our own way.
Yeah, I know. We need to become better observers of nature and more. I mean, I feel like that the people that didn't have iPhones and didn't have TV, whose only entertainment was to sit out at night and watch the stars, probably knew a lot more about nature than we do.
Yeah, yeah. Oh no, I always sort of wondered whether, like someone like Stephen Hawking, like if they had not, you know, had the disability, that would he have done the same, work? There's something about having a limited, access to outside, experience and stimulation that sort of makes you more focused. And these days we're basically, looking at our telephones every 10 minutes and ignoring, the world that's going on around us, and all the, like who would have thought that in, what we call the information age that people would, not believe that a virus was actually taking place in this country. Like we've never had more ability to know, and we've never had less like, ability to use it or seemingly will to use it. So no, I agree with you. I think that's totally on target.
Maybe instead of calling it information age, we should call it the static age, the age of static.
Yeah, exactly. The age of distraction, right? Yeah, well, hopefully not. Hopefully we'll find a way to get a better moniker for our little span of time on Earth than that.
But that'd be good. Well, thank you so much for signing up for the interview, and we'll have to stay in touch and get caught up for other reasons too.
Absolutely, absolutely. I would love to do that, and certainly, give all my best to Stephen and Sonia, and the rest of your family. I hope everyone's doing well. I miss our dinners over at your house here in town, so we'll have to find a way once the world gets past its current situation.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. Well, I hope to see you soon. Hope we get past this, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Yeah, thanks for doing this. I can't wait to see what you make of it all in the end.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
It's never going to